Hi folks, Six Slices here. I was about to do a video on following on from Tobias about my favourite 5 equal end penknives. Now, Tobias had about 200 to choose from. I have a mere, I think it's 19 or 20, and even then that rather depends on your definition of an equal end penknife. But one just stood out for me, and I just wanted to make a quick video, not so much about this knife, but about what it perhaps means. This isn't the knife that I would like it to be. This knife was made as a souvenir for the coronation of Edward VII, who became king after our second longest ever monarch, Queen Elizabeth, died in 1901. So Edward VII became king in 1901 and ruled till 1910. And this knife was made for his coronation, and it has on it a list of all the other kings and queens of England, starting with William the Conqueror in 1066 and riding right up through to Edward VII in 1901. So it's always, you can always look up on this and see, when was so and so elected, and sorry, not elected. They're not elected. When did they become king? And it's it's one of those things. Sometimes they are selected, and sometimes it's a fairly clear accession. So one of the ones there, Queen Elizabeth I, 1558-1603, is on there, and then James I, who was 1603 to 1625. Well, James was James VI of Scotland and was asked to come and become James I of England because Elizabeth left no heir. So, but in the main, it's usually relatively straightforward. So we have there, for example, we had an interregnum because we cut the head off Charles I. Charles II came in 1660 to 1685. Now we have got a new Charles as of Thursday, because our Queen Elizabeth II died. Now she'd reigned from 1952 until till Thursday. That's 70 years, just over 70 years. She started her first Prime Minister was Sir Winston Churchill back in 1952, and her last official duty was to invite Liz Truss to form the new government only on Tuesday of this week. So she had 15 Prime Ministers, and for comparison, those of you in America who are watching this, she was Queen while you had 14 presidents. So we have one head of state who has lasted for 70 years, and it is a very significant thing, her passing. It may seem like it's not important. It's very much removed from the day-to-day hassle of the hassles of the ordinary people like me who go through our lives untouched by the Queen. I have never met the woman. I've met her mother, but I've never met her. I have been within a few feet of her, because a few years ago my wife and I were invited to one of her garden parties, but she only speaks to a certain number of people, and little plebeians like me don't rank there. It was good enough to be invited, but there we are. So it was very sad to see her go. It's going to be a huge change for the country. She's a stalwart. You have, in America, you have presidents who are elected for a period of time, 4 or 8 years, and if nobody shoots them, they usually last out the either 4 or 8 years, as I say. Most generally get re-elected. it seems. One or two haven't. But they come and they go, and some are good and some are bad. Some are very respected in the world and others are not. They all have different politics, and because they're elected politicians, their politics are always to the fore. Our Queen has no politics. She may have had her own views on many things, but she keeps her mouth shut and simply represents the country, and that's what she does as head of state. And she did it with unswerving duty, never complaining. And when you think of the ups and downs that this country's gone through, in the 1970s, we were pretty much bankrupt, and she never, ever criticised the government. When we went through a period in the 80s where we had a very strong woman as our Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, who honestly wasn't everybody's cup of tea, not by any means, but still the Queen grinned and bore it and got on with it. And that's the way she's always done things. She's often criticised for being a drain on society and the finances and economy, but that's always said by people who haven't got a clue what they're talking about. One of the things that the Queen did, and Charles will, I'm sure, do the same, is on accession, she signed over pretty much all of her personal assets, all her land and property, to the state under what's known as the Crown Estates. And in return for that, she gets a thing called the civil list, which is an amount of money that pays for her and her family. And people often see that as a drain on society, in that, the rest of us are having to work and she's paid to just be the Queen. Often she's accused of being paid to do nothing, which again is just totally untrue. She's a very, very hard-working woman. Some of her family are also very hard-working, others not so much. But the point is that the civil list is less than 20% of the total income from the Crown Estates. So in effect, the Queen gives up 80% plus of her income to the state so that the rest of us can have a slightly easier time. And that makes her incredibly good value for money. She doesn't have a salary like the president and the staff and everything else. They are all paid for out of the civil list, and they're paid for effectively out of her own money. So it's easy to say that's a lot of money that goes out to the civil list, but it is less than a fifth of the total amount that the Crown Estate brings in to the country. And as a representative of the country, she's just brilliant. Nobody ever has a bad word to say about her, and she's reigned over some very difficult times. The end of the empire, all these various countries leaving and becoming independent countries, many of whom, 56 of whom, have stayed as members of the Commonwealth of Nations, and 14 of those countries have retained her as their head of state as well. She's going to be a hard act to follow for Charles, but where does this go with this knife? Well, this knife, as I say, was for her four times predecessor. There's Edward VII, George V, Edward VIII, very briefly, George VI, and then Queen Elizabeth II. But my stepfather, throughout his life, always carried a knife very similar to this. It wasn't this knife. I wish I had his one. I don't know what happened to it. When he died, it just disappeared. So I think one of my brothers or somebody pocketed it, but it's never turned up again, so I don't know who's got it. But his will have been for probably the Queen's father, George VI, I believe. But I know that it had all the kings and queens of England. It could have been for Queen Elizabeth's coronation, because I know he was at her coronation. I've got the invitation and the programme of events that he kept as a souvenir from that day. But I think the penknife actually would be for her father. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I think that's more likely the case. Anyway, he carried this thing all his life, and if I still had it, I would be very happy to carry it, because apart from anything else, whenever I hear people flashing some modern, I'm going to say flick knife, not flick knife, flipper knife, and they say, oh, this is a gentleman's carry, I always look at it and I say, no, it's not. This is a gentleman's carry. This is what a gentleman carried in his pocket. My stepfather, Nigel Napier, was one of the true gentlemen of this world. A wonderful, wonderful man who took my mother and my siblings and me on when, well, he should have run a mile really, but he took us on, and he was a great father figure to myself and my brothers. And he carried a knife like this, and I would carry his one if I still had it, but I don't. So I might do with this one. It came up for sale on somebody on Facebook recently, and I paid over the odds for it just because it reminded me of the one that my stepfather carried, and it has a great deal of poignancy as a result. But it has even more poignancy for me today because we have just lost an amazing woman, an amazing queen that we had of this country, the likes of which I suspect we'll never see again. Charles, her son, has become king. We now have King Charles III. As I say, King Charles the First and the Second are both on here. Charles I, if I can find him, 1625. Charles I, 1625. Then Charles II, who came in 1650 after Charles I had been beheaded. We had the interregnum, when interregnum being between kings, literally, when Oliver Cromwell ruled the country. Anyway, we now have King Charles. He must be in his 70s. I can't think exactly how old he is. So there's no way he's going to live. He's going to serve a 70-year term as monarch. And even his son William is, I think, well into his 30s now, if he's not 40. So he's unlikely to serve 70 years. The Queen came to the throne when she was only 25. So that's unlikely to be repeated for some time. I very much hope. I hope George, who's the third in line to the throne, isn't overburdened with something like that at such a young age. But we have lost an amazing woman, and I think the country will be worse for her going. Even those who don't believe in the monarchy will probably mostly admit that she was as good a queen as you could probably ever expect to have had, and then some. So I'll close there, and I'll put this video up. You'll probably still be bothered by adverts, but it won't be monetized, because this is really just about our queen, and then to some extent a little bit about my stepfather. They are of an era, perhaps he and of my grandparents, who were, of the wartime generation, are people that we won't see again. My grandparents both died in their 90s. My grandmother and my grandfather on my father's side both died in their 90s in the last few years. And that's the sort of close of that World War II generation. They served in the war, as Queen Elizabeth served in the war. Anyway, I could witter on all day, and most people have probably already tuned out. But if you are still here, thank you for listening, and I hope you can, share in the grief and hope that the country will come out of this okay, and that Charles will live up to his mother's example. So, thank you very much. Bye.